I get to that part. So we're going to be talking this morning about family trees, because we're looking at Abraham's extended family in our text in Genesis this morning. So I want to start by asking, how well do you know your family tree? For example, can you name all of your first cousins? Now, for some of us, that might be, 4 or 5. For some of us, that's 24 people. That could be a little more difficult. How about, and this is probably one that we're all not going to be able to do unless you've really done your research, can you name all 8 of your great-grandparents? Or any? That's a real challenge. We don't spend as much time on our family trees as people in previous generations. We don't know much about them. There is still a show on PBS called Finding Your Roots. They've only had 16 episodes since 2012, so it doesn't come out very often. What it does is an expert, several of them actually, thank you, will spend hundreds of hours researching and uncovering interesting tidbits about celebrities' ancestors. Things that, of course, they themselves did not know. 3 of the ones that jumped out to me when I looked at all 16 of the episodes they've had is that Susan Sarandon learned that her grandmother was a bigamist. That's not something you necessarily wanted to dig out of the family tree, but they found that out, and they were like, something's going on here. Sarah Jessica Parker learned that her ancestor was condemned as a witch in Salem. That's not something you thought was back there. And then famously, because it led to a bit of controversy because he asked them originally not to air it, Ben Affleck learned that multiple ancestors of his were slave owners. And of course that upset him, and there was a whole thing. And I thought as I was doing that about this, some of you will have seen that this is on my office hanging up. It's been there for about a year and a half. I got this actually a little bit more than a year. I got this at Christmas last year. The gentleman in the photo is my grandfather, Glenn Need. I never met him. Didn't really know much about him. He died while my mom was in high school of cancer. The man that I called Grandpa was my grandma's second husband, kind of like Bill and Marilyn Moffat. By the time I came around, that was Grandpa. And my cousin Rick was my cousin. I didn't know we weren't blood. He's still my cousin. And we still call each other that. But my mom uncovered this newspaper article, and it says, Saranac, that's my hometown, you probably knew that, Saranac wins regional. It turns out my grandfather on my mom's side was into cross country, was a runner. I had no idea. My brother is a runner, I'm a runner, all my nephews, you guys have known, I've gone to the state finals a number of times to watch my nephews run. We're all runners, we enjoy running. I had no idea that in what was the year? Sorry, I have to look close because I can't read this anymore. Where did it go on here? I thought it said what year it was on it. Anyway, he was born in 1933, so this would be in the 1950s, or early 1950s, that they won the regional, that they went to the state meet and did well. And he was consistently the second best runner on the team. And so it was a connection, because I never had any connection with this man because he died long before I was born. And so I found that to be very encouraging, and I hang it up in my wall. In case you're wondering, so if you're not a runner, this is his bib number, the number that they stick on your shirt so they know who you are. And when you finish, if you've ever run a race, they pass those out, and you use pins to stick them on your shirt. I would imagine that if we spent some time and did the research, we'd find an interesting or fascinating story somewhere in your family tree about someone that you didn't know. Maybe it would be great. Maybe one of them had patents for this thing they invented, and you're like, oh, that's awesome. Or maybe one of them was, spent time in prison for triple homicide or something. You don't know what's in your family tree until you go looking. So let's look at the family tree of Abraham here in Genesis 24. This is sort of a transition in the text between one generation and the next. So we begin by finishing up the story of Isaac and Rebekah. It says, "Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev." So this extended look at Abraham's family at the end of his life. We'll start by wrapping up the episode of the servant's journey to Aram to find Rebekah. And we spent 2 messages talking about the servant's faith and Rebekah's faith. That's where we ended last week. At that point, Rebekah had decided on faith to leave her family and her home and go marry Abraham's son. Here we catch up with Isaac, who is living for a time in the Negev desert. That's not unusual. Abraham and his people are semi-nomadic herders. You kind of have to be there. They travel where the green grass is, and you just can't wait around for it. It doesn't work in this semi-arid climate. They don't stay any place very long. The sheep, the goats, they'll eat it all, and you need to move on. The place that he had come from, Beer Lahai Roi, was given that name back in chapter 16. It's been a while since we were in chapter 16 because we took a break of about a year from Genesis. But back in chapter 16, Hagar, Ishmael's mother, had run away during her pregnancy because Sarah was harassing her. That was where the Lord spoke to Hagar and promised to bless her son. Hold on to that thought because it's coming back around in a couple of verses. So that's where Isaac had been. Now he is in the Negev. We're told he went out to the field one evening to meditate. We don't know exactly what that particular Hebrew word means. Meditate's a best guess. It's one of those words that only occurs in the Bible one time. And that makes it difficult for translators to be certain about it, as is the case with this Hebrew word lashua here. It could mean to ponder, to muse, to think, to meditate. Those are all synonyms. So long story short, Isaac is out in the field thinking about something. When, as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?" So Isaac's reverie was interrupted by visitors. Who's coming and why is crossing his mind. Rebekah, looking ahead, sees a young man approaching the caravan and asks who it might be. If this was a movie, it would be a pivotal scene in the story of Isaac and Rebekah, right? The music would swell because they're meeting each other for the first time. But in the narrative, Rebekah, she is anxious to meet Isaac. She just agreed to marry this guy sight unseen. She's wondering, is that the one? Isaac doesn't even know yet if Eliezer found a wife for him. They might be coming back to say, there's nobody, it's hopeless. He doesn't know. As the reader, we know that this is going to end well. We know more than Isaac does. We even know more than Rebekah does. They're still waiting to meet each other. She's told, "He's my master," the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Upon learning that it's indeed Isaac approaching, Rebekah adopts what was a culturally appropriate display of modesty in that time. Evidently, that was something that unmarried women did in the culture that she came from. So now we have Isaac and Rebekah in the same place for the first time. What happens next? We're told the servant told Isaac all he had done. Now, Eliezer retells the whole story. Thankfully, Moses doesn't repeat it here for a third time. Remember, last week we saw the repetition of the encounter at the well for the second time. If this was the third time, you'd be kind of verbatim repeating it as I read it because you'd know it that well by now. But we only have this here. The story, of course, was one of God's providential guidance, a story of faith, a story of hope. So it's a good story to tell. One would imagine that it impressed Isaac a great deal to hear these details. He must have considered Rebekah to be a gift sent by God, of true blessing. We're told Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. We're reminded of the recent passing of Sarah, his mother, a sorrow that still weighs on Isaac's heart. Now Rebekah symbolically takes her place in the tent as the matriarch of this covenantal family. Very soon, Isaac himself will take on the role of the patriarch, foreshadowing. Love is not always present in arranged marriages. It wasn't strictly considered to be necessary. It wasn't why two fathers picked these two people to get married. It was a practical thing. So love was a bonus when it happened, and it happens here. In this case, both Isaac and Rebekah are blessed by a marriage with love in it. So far, so good, right? We're looking at Abraham's family. So far, there have been no complications, no rifts, only a happily married couple. So far, so good. It's going to get a little more complicated, as families do when you start looking around. So what comes next? Abraham had taken another wife. This is the first we learn of this, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Asherites, the Letushites, and the Leumites. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanak, Abida, and Eldah. All these were descendants of Keturah. And as I've mentioned before in Bible study and elsewhere, when we get to names like this, we're just pronouncing them as best we can. And even if I look ahead of time and figure it out, when I'm standing here reading it, I just pronounce it the way it comes out. Sometimes it doesn't come out the way I thought it was going to. These aren't always easy names in English, the way that we pronounce things. So we got a bunch of other people here. Now, we already knew about Isaac, of course, and we knew about Ishmael. They are well known to be Abraham's sons. But these 6 sons through Keturah are generally forgotten. If I asked you before today's message, tell me the sons of Abraham, you would say Isaac and Ishmael. Nobody would get, this is the $1,000 Jeopardy question. Actually, it's harder than the ones they put on there when the Bible is the category. God had promised Abraham, who was childless and getting old when that promise happened, that he would be the father of many nations. Now, we will take note of it later in the book of Genesis when one of these sons or their descendants are a part of the story. For now, we are reminded that this is a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. They won't pop up that often. One such descendant will pop up in the story of Joseph. 3 generations from now, one of them will have a key role to play in Joseph's story. And so I will make note that that was one of Abraham's other sons' descendants when we get there. For now, just take note of the fact that there are 6 more sons on this family tree. We're told Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. So while acknowledging that these are sons of Abraham and that is a further blessing from God, Genesis is part 1 of Moses' retelling of God's blessings through Israel, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's like a 5-part series that Moses wrote telling all of God's blessings through Israel up until that point. So the focus is not going to be beyond that. And that is made clear to us with this reminder. None of them shared in Isaac's inheritance, which also means that none of them inherited the promise of God either. Were they blessed by God on account of Abraham? Yes. But were they part of the covenant of promise? No. And this is a choice of God. In our culture, it's common for parents to divide their assets equally among their children. If they have 2, it's 50-50. If they have 3, it's thirds. That's what we typically do. We don't try to play favorites. The firstborn doesn't get 3 times as much as the second or some such thing. But that wasn't the case for most of history. For most of history, the eldest son inherited much more than those who came after, in part because the main thing people inherited was land. And you couldn't just keep dividing it up, or there wouldn't be enough for anyone to survive on. So a second son, a third son, a fourth son, you kind of had to figure out your own path in life. Many of them became soldiers or merchants or joined the church or some such thing. But Isaac, if you remember, is not Abraham's firstborn son. That's Ishmael. And yet Isaac inherits everything. Another theme of Genesis, of course, which leads us to this. While he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. So this repeats. As with Ishmael, Abraham made clear to these sons that the promised land, all of it, belongs to Isaac. The land to the east, you are welcome to find a home there wherever you want to go, but you can't stay here. Not here. Abraham provided gifts for them out of his wealth, but not an inheritance. So this is a clear indicator to each and every one of them where they fall in the pecking order. It's after Isaac. And of course, that is sowing seeds for future conflict when something like that happens in a family. We'll keep an eye on that later in the text. Verse 7 tells us Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. This is how you describe a good life and a good death in the ancient Near East. We're told that he lived all the years that anyone could want. He provided for his children, those who would be his legacy, and then he joined his ancestors in the afterlife. This is an interesting comment here because the Torah itself, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy, doesn't really offer very many details about what was believed by Abraham or those who came before him, his ancestors or his descendants, about life after death. It's really not a common topic in the books of Moses. The idea of heaven and hell and all of that will be revealed by God over time, but those ideas didn't begin as fully formed theological concepts of life after death way back in the time of Abraham. So we really don't know much about what they believed about these things because the text never really talks about it beyond an allusion like this. Now, this pattern actually holds true for numerous theological truths in Scripture. God will continue to reveal more and more about himself and his plans and his purposes as the generations unfold. Of course, we see the fullness of that with the advent of the Christ, the Son of God, coming in the flesh to reveal so much more about God and his plans. We're told something important here. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite. Here Genesis records an important moment in the family of Abraham without commenting on its importance. It just tells us it happened. Isaac and Ishmael buried their father together. And that's what the painting at the bottom is trying to portray. Ishmael was sent away by Isaac's mom, Sarah, because she feared him as a rival to the child that she had given birth to. That breach caused great pain to Abraham, but he agreed to be parted from Ishmael to placate Sarah. And now about 20 years have passed since Ishmael left. These two boys are standing side by side. Isaac is a young man, Ishmael some years older, and together they are mourning the man who was father to them both. Now, sadly, this moment will not lead to lasting harmony between Isaac's descendants and Ishmael's descendants. That was not meant to be. But at least these two men did their part by setting their rivalry aside to honor their father together. When a family is torn asunder by rivalry or hurts or even evil deeds that someone does, it can be very difficult to heal those rifts. Even if everyone wants to. Sometimes people don't want to, and then it's virtually impossible. But even if you want to, people struggle to get past the hurts, to truly forgive. Isaac and Ishmael were set up as rivals. That was not their own making. That was circumstances that they were born into. But at least here, they set aside that to do the right thing. It's a hopeful sign. It's something. And sometimes in our families, that's what we can get, and we should take it. Take something that we can build on. We're told that the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites, there Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. As we learned last February when I preached Genesis 22 and 23, the story of Abraham burying Sarah in this field was recorded there. His Hittite neighbor Ephron had swindled Abraham with a very highly inflated price for the cave. Be that as it may, now Abraham is also laid to rest beside Sarah in the promised land. This site will later in history be known as the tomb of the patriarchs. Abraham and Sarah are here. Eventually, so will Isaac and Rebekah be in this cave. We're told after Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer Lahai Roi. The story of Isaac, Rebekah, and their sons will occupy Genesis next. We'll be talking about them next week. Now we are given an overview that confirms that God's blessings did indeed continue upon Abraham's death with his heir, Isaac. Later, Scripture will often refer to the Lord as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That will be a common way to describe God. That intergenerational fidelity from God not only demonstrates God's faithfulness over time from one generation to the next, but also God's staying power. God has no rival. God will always be the Lord of heaven and earth, so he can be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and every generation after. One more piece of Abraham's family tree is now going to be looked at. It says, this is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Sarah's slave Hagar the Egyptian bore to Abraham. When Hagar ran away because of Sarah's hostility to her in chapter 21, God made a promise to her that he would make Ishmael into a great nation. That story is certainly not the focus of Genesis, but Moses knows that God keeping his promises is a good theme to talk about. Because remember, he is writing this as the Israelites are traveling from Egypt to the Promised Land. They really need to know and understand that God keeps his promises. So Genesis contains this brief synopsis to show us that God was faithful to the promise he made to Ishmael. And here are some more names. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsham, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tima, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. As you already know, Jacob is about to have 12 sons, not in this generation, but in the next one, just as Ishmael did, both symbolic of fullness, of completeness. God fully blessed Ishmael, is what we're supposed to take away from hearing that he had 12 sons. His descendants may not be the chosen people, but they nonetheless came to be because God was blessing Ishmael. We got two more things to learn about Ishmael's family. Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. The end of Ishmael's brief story, we only learn a few things about him in Genesis, echoes that of his father, Abraham. It's told much the same way. He too may have been, even though he was the son that Sarah regretted encouraging Abraham to have, he was Abraham's son just the same. His destination is the same as Abraham. He joined the people of God in the afterlife, having been known of the Lord and having known the Lord by faith. Lastly, his descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt, as you go toward Ashur, and they lived in hostility toward all the tribes related to them. This section, highlighting the various branches of Abraham's family tree, ends with the descendants of Ishmael also living outside of the promised land. The final phrase about hostility with respect to the tribal relatives of Ishmael is actually a difficult one to translate from the Hebrew to English. The NIV here chooses to echo chapter 16, verse 12, where God told Hagar that her son would live in antagonism toward all his brothers. Whether that hostility is being conveyed here or not, the picture we receive from Genesis of Isaac, Ishmael, and Abraham's 6 sons with Keturah is one of both blessings from God and at the same time an inevitable parting of the ways, as this family literally moves apart to dwell separately. For Abraham's sake, all of them were blessed, but they were not destined to be, according to the will of God, one people. We're left with a reminder of how messy family relations can be, how hostility can grow between siblings, but also a reminder that it can be overcome, even if it takes the grave side of a parent to reconcile sundered siblings. 3 things to help you remember this text, 3 things to highlight. Number 1, the love between Isaac and Rebekah was a blessing, a confirmation of the wisdom of God's providence in their lives. Number 2, the distinction between Isaac, the child of promise, and his brothers, who were blessed but not chosen to inherit the covenant, reminds us that grace is God's gift. It's freely given. It's not demanded. And thirdly, for all its family drama, Isaac and Ishmael bearing Abraham together gives us hope that our own family rifts can be healed.